Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Aging Less, the Longevity Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Marie Stella, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the show. With so many supplements on the market today, it's hard to know whether or not we're getting the right amount of nutrition in our bodies, especially for those exploring changes in diet. For those exploring becoming vegan or vegetarian, protein might be one of those key concerns. Our guest today, Professor Ajmol Ali, is here to shed some light on why the body needs protein and how it affects our overall health and longevity. Aj completed his studies at Loughborough University and is currently a professor of exercise science in the School of Sport, Exercise and Nutrition at Massey University. Aj was instrumental in setting up the Sport and Exercise Laboratory at the Auckland campus. His research areas span several themes, including paediatric exercise science, supplementation for health, wellness and performance, sport performance, and wellness at work. Aj is the International Director for College of Health and a former Deputy Chair for the Massey University Human Ethics Committee. He is the principal researcher for the Healthy Active Learning Initiative, part of the government wellbeing budget, with a funding of $47 million provided to Sport NZ, Ministry of Health and Ministry of Education to undertake a 5-year initiative to improve the wellbeing of children through healthy eating, drinking, and quality physical activity. Aj has published over 100 journal articles, books, and book chapters. He has supervised to completion 7 PhD students and over 40 master's students. Aj is also a director of Imago Wellness Coaching, collaborating with national and international organizations to provide online customized wellness coaching to help employees become more productive and lead healthier lives. Away from work, Aj still continues to play football, albeit at a much slower pace than in his younger years. He also enjoys playing and coaching football with his 2 young children. So, with this wealth of knowledge and fascinating career, I'm really excited to speak to Aj today. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sarah.
So just to get us started, we want to know a bit more about you and your career. So can you tell us what compelled you to study sports science and then to become an academic and lead such a fascinating career so far?
Well, maybe I should start from a young age, I guess. I've always loved playing sport. Sport's always been a very important part of my life. And I actually was born in Bangladesh, on a mud floor in Bangladesh. And then I managed to move to the UK where my dad was, and I was this naive young Bangladeshi kid in a small town and not knowing a single person, going into a place where I did not know the language. I had to grow up there, and it was really interesting. And sport was the vehicle that I did to do that. It's the world's communication language, I guess, playing with kids, playing with other kids, and that's got my love for sport even more. I use the sport as a vehicle for me to understand the language, to get on well with my peers, and very soon I managed to catch up with the other kids relatively quickly. And then through high school, I carried on my love of sport. I played lots of different types of sports, and I went to university. And at university, I initially wanted to be a PE teacher because of my love of sport and want to share it with others. But I got involved in research. I was initially a participant in a study, and then I took up my thesis in studies relating to football and nutrition for football. And then I did my master's and my PhD. And so that's what got me going. And I'm really interested in not only playing, but also what makes people tick. And now in my later years now as an academic, I'm really wanting to understand how we can use sport as a vehicle for engagement, as a way to get people being more active, leading healthier lives, because that's what we want. We've got lots of different superpowers. If we can't move well, then we can't do other things. So ultimately, my research area now has become about promoting wellness to prevent illness and maintain performance. So it's been a bit of a journey, but sport has been a very wonderful part of that.
Yeah, no, that's a great journey. I mean, it sounds like you were very inspired by sport to, become a PE teacher, but then went on a different route with it. And I think that's really inspiring. I love hearing about how people's careers flow and change and go in directions that they didn't necessarily expect. So that is also a great introduction for our topic today. But before we dive into it, we want to get to know you a little bit better just with some icebreaker questions. So, first of all, I mean, I feel like I might know what the answer to this is going to be, but what do you like to do in your spare time?
I've said the word football a few times, and so I like playing and coaching football. That's
Hmm.
my bag, if you like, but also like other forms of exercise as well. And I like reading. I practice a lot of mindfulness. And a lot of the things I do try and impart on others, I practice myself. So, as I said, it's about promoting wellness to prevent illness and maintain performance. So that's a theme that runs through my life, through my sport, and also through my research as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And is there a book or a movie that you've enjoyed recently?
I've watched quite a few movies recently, but what's been really interesting with my son, 9-year-old son, he said to me, "What movie did I watch when I was a kid?" So I took him through some of my classics, if you like, the 80s movies. And so
Mm,
we've watched things like the Back to the Future, the Star Wars films, and the Indiana Jones. And he's really engaged with me on that. And it's fantastic when we sit down and watch movie night and go back through my youth, I guess. That's been really
that's
quite nice.
beautiful. Yeah, that's really nice. Are there any podcasts that you're listening to at the moment, or are you too busy being on them?
I have done a few podcasts, and I don't really listen to too many, dare I say, because my spare time when I use to try and engage with my family back in the UK or in Bangladesh or other parts of the world, when
Mm.
I'm driving in my car, I talk to my family. So not podcasts per se, but I guess I listen to a lot of stories from around the world, and that gets me going, and I quite enjoy that.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you have a role model? This could be somebody in your personal life, or it could be a professional role model, for example.
Great question. And if I was to answer it, I'm going to be greedy. I'm going to say three. So if I had three people who I would
Okay.
invite to a dinner table, let's say, a dinner guest, one would be Freddie Mercury. I
Hmm.
love Queen, and I've always admired how Freddie has come through various cultural and societal and racist sorts of challenges to get where he was. And similarly, John Barnes, my favourite footballer, had the pleasure of meeting him last year. And again, he's had to go through some of these challenges. And the third person there would be my dad. Again, coming from a small town, a small village, born on the same mud floor many, many years ago, going through to the UK and then living his life, his best life, as best as he could in there. So through all of that, these three people have gone through challenges of coming from a different background and then having to flourish and make their change in more modern society. That's been really powerful and very resonates very much with me.
Yeah, of course. That's really interesting. And finally, is there a course or a class that has inspired you? This could be one that you have taken or maybe something that you've taught.
I was going through a tough time in my life about 7 or 8 years ago. And at that time, I was talking to one of my colleagues, and she says, "Aj, you're not very well." And I said, "No, I'm not very well." And she says, "What you need to do is try mindfulness." And I said, initially, that's a bit woohoo for me. I'm not sure if I should try that. But I did. And I'm so glad I did, because it was the
Mm.
best training I've done at the university. And I practice mindfulness meditation every day since. And it's been fantastic for me. It's helped me find balance in my life. It's helped me at work. It's helped me become a better parent. It's helped me become a better human. So the mindfulness course has been very powerful for me.
Interesting. Honestly, I interview so many guests in so many different facets, and so many of them say mindfulness that it's really starting to sink into for me that it's like, wow, this is coming up again and again. And it's, yeah, it's really fantastic. It's a great practice to have. So we are going to jump into our interview questions now. So we're just going to do some definitions per se, some basic questions to get going. Firstly, how would you define longevity? What does longevity mean to you?
Well, the dictionary definition of longevity is a long life, is to live a long life. But for me, longevity is not just about living a long life. It's about being able to live your best life
Mm.
every day for as long as you can. So what we need to do, and I say this to people, is to make time for your wellness, as otherwise you'll be forced to take time for your illness. So I'd like to share a little story about what I mean by that. My dad, he was grown up very poor, very young, and he actually started smoking at 5 years old. That's when he started full-time work as well. So he's had a tough life in that sense. And then later on in his life, he was in his late 40s or early 50s and so on. and he went out for a walk because the doctor told him he needed to go for a walk. So he went for a walk, and in the snow in the UK, he fell over, and he just did not have the energy to get back up again. He just did not have that. And my mum had to come find him 20 minutes later or so. And I was really sad because she shared that with me after he died. So what I mean by that is, could my dad have lived his best life? Could he have taken the time to look after his wellness better so that he'd be around for longer, but not just that, but he'd live a better, fuller life for the time that he has. So that's what longevity means to me.
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. And now, getting into our topic a bit more for today, could you explain what protein represents in the context of overall health and then also particularly as we age?
Mm. Well, protein is fundamental to the building blocks of our bodies. There's about 50,000 distinct types of proteins in our human body. Most of them are in muscle, 65% are in the muscle, and it's present in all the body tissues. So it's relevant throughout the life cycle. When you're a baby, obviously you're growing, and you need to make sure there's sufficient protein there to keep the building blocks going. As you age, we go through a process of like a homeostatic process. We build protein, we get rid of protein, we build protein, we go through this sort of anabolic and catabolic states. So this is what we call protein turnover. So when that happens, we need to make sure we have sufficient protein to keep our body functions being maintained. And then what happens as we age, our muscle mass decreases, and especially as we go over about 50 years old, it gets even worse. Now, the other thing right now in the world right now, as you know, we are an aging population. There are currently about 1.2 billion people over 60, and this will rise. This will nearly double to 2.1 billion by 2050. And people over 80 years old, because aging population, that population is expected to triple. So as we age, we're losing muscle mass. As we age, we're losing that functionality. So it becomes even more important to overcome that. And protein and sufficient protein intake is required to help with the muscle function, and also help with maintaining the body's function, so that as you get older and your mobility gets challenged and your bone mass gets challenged and your muscle mass and other things get challenged, we can maintain that healthy life. We can create that longevity, but it's not just about living longer, it's about living healthier for longer.
Interesting. So, for those of us who really know nothing necessarily about protein or how the body works and those internal things that you're talking about, what are the primary functions of protein?
So protein contains amino acids, and it's these amino acids that are used as the building blocks for everything in our body, pretty much, whatever we have. They're like the bricks that you use to build a house, for example. And there are some of these bricks or these amino acids that we cannot produce ourselves. So they're what we call essential amino acids. There are 9 of them. And then there are 11 non-essential amino acids, which we can use other bricks to make these non-essential ones in the body. And so we eat protein, we digest the food, we absorb these amino acids, and then that's what we use for these processes. And the processes can be sort of covered in 4 main areas. These essential nutrients, which are required for, immune system function, for blood and maintaining blood function, the hormones, which help send messages to different parts of the body, and so on. Then there's, from a maintenance perspective, the muscle maintenance. I talked about this constant breakdown and build up of our muscle. It keeps our bodies dynamic, resistance to change, and help to grow our muscles or to repair and so on. And then it can also help with appetite control. So if we have protein, sufficient protein, it can make sure that we maintain our weight and so on. And then from an exercise perspective and a sports perspective, it helps with the recovery processes, because every time we exercise, every time you plant your foot down when you walk, you're damaging muscle, and we need the protein to help recover that. We also use some of that protein as an energy source, just like a fuel in a fire, and so we need to replace that. So protein is important in so many different facets of life that we just need to make sure that we have sufficient quantity and sufficient quality of protein.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a very detailed outline, and it makes a lot of sense to me. And I feel like you've already maybe covered this a bit, but what do you think is the relationship between longevity and protein intake?
Well, as we age, our muscle mass goes down, as I said, and our body composition changes as well. So you might actually increase your body mass, your weight, but your protein mass and your muscle mass goes down, and your fat composition can increase. And as a result of all of these sorts of changes, your basal metabolic rate, or the amount of energy that you need to keep your body functioning, goes down as well. The other thing to note is as we age, there are 2 or 3 different types of muscle fibers, type 1 and type 2 for argument's sake, and there's various variations of type 2. But type 2 muscle fibers change even more, and they're the larger and more strength-promoting muscle. So when they change as well, we reduce our mobility. We reduce our ability to carry out everyday lives. And for some people, just getting out of a chair can become a challenge. As I mentioned before with my dad, getting up off the floor when he slipped over on the snow became an impossible challenge. You just did not have the functionality to do that. So to maintain our longevity, to maintain vitality, that's the ability to live a good life, we need to make sure that we have sufficient protein to help with the muscle function, to help with various things that we need to keep our bodies living a good life.
Yeah. Interesting. So I'm going to now go into maybe some more detailed questions, kind of the nitty gritty. What are the recommended daily protein intake ranges for really active individuals or even athletes?
Well, the RDA for protein depends on who you are. We know that males have a higher needs than women, and it's higher as you age because of the reasons I said. So typically what we say in terms of grams per day, so 0.8 grams per day for most adults is sufficient. So for an 80 kilo person, that's about 65 grams of protein. That's what we might need. Whereas for older people, it goes up a bit because of the age-related sarcopenia, the age-related changes in muscle function. We need to keep our protein sufficient to overcome some of that. So it's about 1.2 grams per day. So as you get older, you just need a bit more. But then that changes also depending on the activity that you may do as well.
Interesting. How can athletes determine their individual protein needs based on factors like body weight and activity level and those kind of factors?
If you exercise more, you're going to, use up some of those protein as a fuel, because about 6% of our energy needs is not just from carbohydrate and fat, it comes from protein as well, burning protein. So your body is literally burning itself to keep the energy going. And also, every time we do different types of activities, we're damaging the tiny muscle fibers within our muscles, and they need replenishing. So imagine just like strings of muscle fibers that are within the body. They've been damaged. They have to be taken away, recycled, and new muscle fibers need to be laid down. So for all of that reasons, we have a higher requirement of protein for athletes relative to everyday person. So about 1.4 to 2 grams a day. It's higher in endurance exercise, and then higher still in resistance trained people. And then if you're bodybuilding, that's even higher, even still, because the challenge with bodybuilding type activities is they intentionally go out to destroy their muscles, damage their muscles to such an extent, take the more protein, and it replenishes it stronger, hence the muscles get bigger. So for an 80 kilo person, the protein requirements for an everyday person, non-exercising, might be 65 grams a day, but for an athlete, depending on type of exercise they do, between 120 and 160 grams a day. That's what the typical research says.
Yeah. Really interesting. So what about protein's sort of interaction with other things then? How does protein intake interact with other macronutrients in supporting athletic performance and recovery?
Well, when we exercise, we are losing a number of different things from our body. So we're losing water, we're losing electrolytes, the salts, we're losing carbohydrate stores. It could be muscle glycogen, it could be the blood glucose, or it could be liver glycogen as well. So we're losing carbohydrate stores. We're also losing some fat as well. And we also lose some protein. So we lose some protein that's used as a fuel, and also some protein that is lost because of muscle damage and damaging activity that we may perform. So all of that needs to be replaced. And how do we replace it? We replace it in the food and the water that we consume. Now, most of that we can consume from a balanced diet, and that's great. And the whole point of a supplement, if you like, is to supplement what you can't necessarily have in our diet. So if you're eating a balanced diet, if you're eating sufficient high-quality foods that give you the balance between protein and carbohydrate and fats and waters and electrolytes and so on, you should be able to replenish all of that. But for some athletes, they may be challenged for that. So after exercise, for example, the blood from our gut area has gone everywhere. It's gone everywhere but in your tummy. And so therefore, if you take food at that time point, then it might give you stomach cramps. You might not necessarily want it, and you might feel sick afterwards. So therefore, some people look at other ways of trying to replace some of those foods, and we can look at things that may work for you. And it might be different to someone else. So we can train the body to take food after exercise so that we get the sufficient protein and carbohydrate in there. So protein and carbohydrate we need to help replace the glycogen levels, the carbohydrate levels, but it also helps with the muscle repair and the replenishing of these called branched chain amino acids that are used as a fuel as well. So the more exercise you do and the more resistance type training you do, the more protein requirement there is. And the other thing, if you take a balanced meal and have good food afterwards, nutrient-dense food, not necessarily processed food, then you should be able to get most of that in your diet. It's just, can you stomach it post-exercise?
Yeah, so that's actually my next question. What is the importance of timing your protein intake? Before exercise, after exercise, what's usually the best way?
Well, there's been a lot of research done in the actual timing of exercise. And when I was a student 30 years ago, so now there was this term that people use. It was called the crucial time window. And there was evidence at that time that you needed to consume protein immediately after exercise, within like 1 hour after exercise, to get the best benefits. And the evidence there showed that it increased the muscle protein synthesis, that turnover for the anabolism, for the ability to lay more muscle down within 1 hour. But then more recently, we've shown that you can still eat even up to 8 hours after an exercise bout and still get the same sort of benefit. So that time window for exercise, also for consuming protein after exercise, has been improved or increased as a result. And the other thing is that I've talked to other protein experts around the world, and one of them, a friend of mine, the late Kevin Tipton, he was a pioneer in this space. And I remember talking to him at a conference many years ago now, and he said he started doing some research and saying, could we take protein before exercise? And so he published quite a few studies in this space and showed that taking protein before exercise can actually prime the body during the exercise itself and reduce the sort of protein catabolism, the breakdown of protein a bit more, and promote that anabolism, that laying down or addition of protein over a longer period of time. So now the suggestion is, in terms of timing, as long as you have sufficient amount throughout the day while you're training, then it shouldn't really matter when you specifically have the protein. But as I said before, when you exercise and the blood goes in other places, you don't necessarily want to eat at that time. And then think about what works for you. So you can train your body just like you train for exercise. You can train the body for taking in food at certain times. And if you can do that well, then the body knows when it needs to put the blood back into the gut area here to digest and absorb the food. So timing is important, but there's a lot of individual variances in there, and it can also depend on the type of exercise that you do.
Yeah, I just know I've seen so many people, with their protein shakes or their, whatever they have to do when they exercise, and they always seem to be, the gym bros or whoever it is online talking about, I must drink this like before or whatever. But it sounds like to me, from what you've said, that the results are really quite similar as long as you have that 8 hour, that window.
Yeah, as long as you have the sufficient protein in the whole day. And for some people, the 8 hour window could be between the finish of one training session and the start of the next anyway. So it becomes like a post, but a pre as well, especially for the people who train maybe twice a day and who are training at a higher intensity and a higher level.
Interesting. Yeah. So do you think that individuals should track and adjust their protein intake to ensure they're meeting, how much protein they need, and also then for their fitness goals?
Mm. That's a really interesting question, because it's hard to track the individual protein requirements unless you have, scientific equipment and lab-based trials that you can do. For example, in one of our studies, we looked at nitrogen balance. So the amount of protein that was in the food and nitrogen contained in that food. And then we looked at the amount of nitrogen that you expel through your urine and through your stool samples as well. So we had to collect that for 24 hours. It wasn't very pleasant for our PhD student, but she collected that. And we showed how much the protein turnover was from the intake and from the expenditure. And we managed that. That's not everyone's cup of tea, of course, and no one's going to be able to manage that. So there are some sort of calculations type methods. So based on typically what you might eat and typically the type of exercise you do and who you are and what you do. And you can utilize those algorithms, if you like, to estimate what your protein requirements will be.
So, are there some common misconceptions about protein intake and muscle building that people should be aware of?
Yes, there are quite a few common misconceptions, and some of them, obviously, I might not have even heard about. There's sort of the talk in the gyms and so on. But one of them is the age-old thing that happens with many people. If something is good, more must be better. And that's the same with protein. Now, the body can only process so much protein. And after it reaches its threshold, it will just excrete it and we'll just pee a lot more. You'll pee out the urine. And so more is not necessarily better. What is better is to try and manage your protein throughout the course of the day. So what's the optimum amount? How can you get towards the threshold for yourself? And then try and manage that at each bout of activity or each bout of eating that you do. So that's one aspect. The other one is obviously more recently, there are more vegan people and there are more vegan types of food around as well. And some people might say, well, vegans are not getting the right protein, or vegans cannot grow the muscle as well as people who eat protein from animal sources. Well, that's a bit of a misconception as well, because what the challenge for vegans is that the best quality protein do indeed come from animal protein. So they have a much higher quality of protein. And the reason for that is because they contain more of the essential amino acids that the body cannot produce. And they have a much higher rating. So things like meat or eggs or whey protein and so on, they have a much higher amino acid content of the quality non-essential amino acids than, for example, soy protein or pea protein or rice protein or other types of protein from broccoli and so on. Now, with vegans, as long as they can get a blend of proteins and they get different types of proteins which have different qualities, then they're just as good as the proteins from animal proteins as well, or the amino acid mix from animal protein. So it's a bit of a misconception that vegans cannot get the right mix of essential amino acids. Now, one thing that I will say on that is one of the largest vitamin that we have, the vitamin B12, which is required for a range of body purposes like maintaining blood cells and creating blood cells and cell metabolism, and also helping with DNA and repairing DNA and so on. That vitamin B12 is only found in animal sources. So vegans, for that, they wouldn't require supplements to help that intake there. One other misconception, I guess, is that excess protein can be turned to fat. And so if you have too much protein, it's going to turn to fat. And people have obviously known that if you eat red meat, there's also fat in there. There's also, which increases cholesterol, which can increase your risk of cardiovascular diseases and so on. So it's not necessarily the red meat per se. Processed meats are probably worse for that. But it's the overall energy that you take. So it's not the protein per se that's the problem. It's the excess energy from calories that you're taking, which can then be turned into fat. So here's some examples of protein issues like that. So more is not necessarily better. Vegans can have a nice blend of proteins based on a range of sources that they can add. And then too much is not necessarily going to turn into fat. It's actually, it's if you just eat too much, that it'll have more fat.
Yeah, that's great. Those are some really interesting misconceptions that I've definitely heard of before. And I think it's great to sort of go through them one by one and go, hey, well, actually, maybe this is the science as opposed to just sort of what we've heard out and about. So my next question for you is there any potential risks of consuming too much or too little protein?
That's a great question, because as I said, some is good, more must be better is one school of thought, but some is good, not enough is also a challenge as well. Now, we've all heard of malnutrition. And malnutrition conjures up thoughts of people who are in famine states in various parts of the world, in the global south, and so on. But we can also have malnutrition in the West. We can also have malnutrition from various types of macro and micronutrients that's missing in our body, including protein. Now, the diet should contain about 10 to 15% of protein, and a large percentage should be from carbohydrate, and about 30% or so from fat, or no more than 30% from fat. But not everyone in the world has access to protein. Protein is usually the most expensive foods that we have as well, and typically is from meat or milk or dairy and fish and so on. Not everyone has access to that. So people can be protein malnourished, and that will obviously harm your immune function. It can help with the body or challenges to the body maintenance. It can help with blood flow and create enough blood to do all the things that it needs to do around the body. It can impact on hormone inaction as well. So the estimates are about 150 million people around the world are protein malnourished. So, and approximately 200,000 deaths per year are due to lack of protein. So too little protein can certainly be a problem for people. But in the West and in the developed countries, malnutrition from protein can also happen in everyday people, and especially in people who may be older, because they don't necessarily get the right proteins that they need. As we age, our taste profile changes, our smell changes, and we lose a bit of appetite at times. We have changes in mood and so on, which means our appetite can change. And as a result of that, as we age, we may not necessarily get the right protein that we need. And also people's dental health is changed. They might not have the ability to chew food and so on. So as a result of that, we can have malnutrition in protein, so in even developed countries. So that's the too little protein. But what about too much? Well, there's some evidence, and it's scant sort of evidence to suggest that protein could potentially have kidney-related issues, because the kidney helps get rid of the nitrogen. It gets rid of that into urea, and then we go through the bathroom and it goes out as urine. And so that could be a challenge, but large-scale research studies don't really show big problems. And even when people have had really high levels of protein, 5-6 grams of protein per kilo body mass, even those guys have not been that much of a challenge in terms of markers of kidney damage and so on. The other thing about too much protein is protein, especially in red meat, it can come with high fat content, which has its own issues, as I said. But protein sometimes is also added into, especially processed foods, which can provide other things which can potentially lead to the harm, not protein per se. So all in all, most people will not eat sufficient protein to cause them challenges. The challenge is that they're under nutrition of protein, so getting sufficient protein to lead healthy lives.
So I'm interested in your opinion on supplements for this next question. How do protein supplements compare to whole food sources in terms of effectiveness for muscle growth and recovery? I myself don't know that much about supplements, but I'm interested to hear what you think, if they're made to be just as good.
A supplement is just that, is a supplement to what you already take in your diet. Therefore, if you have a balanced diet and you have sufficient protein, sufficient fats, sufficient micronutrients, you shouldn't really need supplements. Supplements are there when there are challenges to that diet. It may be challenges due to being able to chew properly, so that you need to have liquid food. Or it might be because as women go through pregnancy or menstruation and so on, they might need some iron to supplement what they're losing. Or it might be people who are old and they can't chew their food, therefore they may need some supplements to help them along. Or, as I said, vegan people who may not necessarily have sufficient B12 in their diet to supplement that. So sometimes, unfortunately, with the huge spend in and the marketing of these supplement products, they sort of tell you need to have this, otherwise you're not going to get the muscle recovery. You need to have this, otherwise you're not going to have the good immune function and all the rest of that, which is a bit of a misnomer, unfortunately. If you have the right diet, you're getting all the food that you need. And if you then supplement on top, just like protein, your body will just get rid of it because it's rich saturation. It's got what it needs. Now, if you are going to take supplements, look at things that have had good research with them. We have lots of guiding principles from different organizations around the world will give you sort of quality supplements. These are ones that work. Others, the messaging maybe not as good, and others, they're probably a waste of time and money for you because the evidence is just not strong enough for that. With regards protein supplements, if you do need to take protein supplements, the animal-based protein supplements do have a higher score, and there's something called the DIAS score, the digestible and dispensable amino acid score. The DIAS of whey protein and animal-based protein is much higher than non-animal types of protein. So if you are looking for that, look at things like the quality of the protein rather than just the quantity of it. The other thing to note is that especially with protein, we need to make sure that we have sufficient these essential amino acids. And one of the key essential amino acids is leucine. And leucine is a branched chain amino acid. It's an amino acid that helps with act as a fuel, but it also is an important signaler in the body to help promote muscle protein synthesis. And so when we have sufficient leucine in our diet, we can reach what we call the leucine threshold. And if we can hit the leucine threshold, we're more likely to keep that amino acid protein turnover going to help us supplement the body where it might not necessarily be sufficient from our diet.
So how do you think that we can improve protein absorption?
Protein, if we have too much in one go, it can be a challenge. So for example, as people age, they might have their main protein meal. It might be a steak at the end of an evening at 7, 8 o'clock at night or so. And if they've not had sufficient protein during the day, then that can be problematic for them. What we need to do is to make sure that if you need, for example, 80 grams of protein, you need to try and separate that into 4 bouts of eating, 20 grams at each mealtime, because any more than that, the body might just get rid of the excess from that one bout of 80 grams that you've eaten. So we need to make sure to absorb the protein best, to have it at set times so that we can manage and the body can absorb it at specific times. The other thing which helps is the palatability. So if you don't like the taste, and if you're losing your ability to chew food and so on, that can be a problem. So how can you help yourself with that? You know your own body. Do you need to supplement that with liquid forms of protein? The other thing for vegans, if they're not having enough of the essential amino acid from 1 or 2 sources of protein that they might have, then you need to have a balanced and a diversified protein intake to help you manage that absorption there. And as I said before, the essential amino acids is what we really should be looking for. And the high quality proteins predominantly come from animal-based, but it can come from plant-based if you look around and read the label and so on.
Yeah. Well, this has all been extremely educational for me. I'm very, very pleased that you have shared so much with us today. And I'm now going to move to our practices and habits segment. This is where I just want to ask you, is there a habit that you would recommend practicing to ensure a healthy protein intake?
Great question. I think the practices that we can have is that simply read, diversify, and try. There's a nice thing. Read, diversify, and try. So read the label. See how much protein there is in there. Diversify food intake. Get a range of foods to try and get the right level of nutrients that you need. And then try new foods. Say with my kids as well. Always try. Before you say, no, I don't like it, try the food. See what it is. Because having that balance and having that range of taste flavors will enable you to get the range of nutrients that you need.
Absolutely. And do you think that people will find some of this challenging?
Definitely, because we have cognitive drivers of our hunger and cognitive drivers of our food taste. I've never liked this, therefore I won't try it again. And it's that sort of fixed mindset that we have. The other thing is it might not be culturally appropriate for some people. If it's not culturally appropriate to have certain types of shellfish and seafood, like it wasn't necessarily for me growing up, because I never really had access to that. But then as I came across in different cultures and try different food, because in a more familial environment, then you try those things. And then when you do, then you enjoy that. And then that becomes part of that diversification to help you get the right nutrients without the need for supplements.
Yeah, well, that is fantastic advice. Thank you for sharing that practice with us and everything so far. I'm now going to move to our open mic segment. This is where it's your chance to talk about anything you're passionate about. It doesn't even have to be related to what we've spoken of so far, but of course it can be. So the floor is yours.
Amazing. Thank you. So a lot of my research, or in fact, all my research is all about promoting wellness to prevent illness. So whether it's eating disorder prevention, helping people through menopause, or helping people with stroke overcome the challenges of the debilitating disease and helping with protein and exercise to help them live better lives. And also looking at reducing the risk of hypertension and cognitive decline and so on. So it's all about how can we use supplementation? How can we use exercise, good practices to help promote wellness, to prevent illness while still maintaining performance. So that's my key thing. And that's part of the reason why I set this business up, Imago Wellness Coaching. So Imago is the last stage that a caterpillar goes through before it becomes a butterfly. So what we want people to do is, yeah, you're doing okay. How can you flourish? What can we do to help you? How can we be the guide on the side for you so that you can understand some of the challenges about supplements, about when to eat, how to eat, etc., from a diet's perspective, or when to sleep, or how best to sleep from a sleep perspective, or how can I help overcome stress-related challenges that might impact on my sleep and my other aspects of wellness. And then, well, how can I move my body so that I'm time poor and I can do these activities to help myself along. So that's what that business is about. It's about a guide on the side to help you perform to your utmost, because maintenance of performance is very critical, but you're doing that while you're staying and you're eating well, and you're moving well, and you're thinking well, and you're sleeping well. So that's the sort of thing I'm very passionate about. And a lot of my research is around that too. Now, I also like running, Sarah. I like running. And while I'm running, I do a lot of my good thinking as well. And I was running, and I say to people, it's really hard to change one thing by 100%. What's easier when it comes to health is to try and find 100 things you can change by 1%. And so I was running and I think, I'd love people to join me on this 1% club. And I thought, that's a nice, interesting thing to it. And then I thought, well, a lot of my research is about the heart and things like, using beetroot juice to help reduce blood pressure and so on. And then I thought, well, we need to do a bit of hard work with wellness. It can't just happen. So what do? Well, you have to do some digging, and you dig with a spade. And then, as the Roman poet Virgil said, health is wealth. And diamonds are quite wealthy, sort of, high monetary value and so on. So I thought, well, club, hearts, spades, and diamonds. And I thought, that's quite interesting. Could I do something around that? And I talked to a colleague of mine, and she was heavily pregnant. And I asked her about some of the challenges she faced. And she says, actually, I'm mostly doing okay, apart from one thing. And she said, I spoke to my midwife, heavily pregnant. I couldn't sleep. And she said, and she said to me, do you know what she did, Aj? I know. What did she do? Well, she gave me that many emails about sleeping through pregnancy, and then that many leaflets about sleeping through pregnancy. And then every time she called me, it was about how you're sleeping. And do you know what I did, Aj? No, I don't know. I did none of it. I was so overwhelmed with the information, but I did absolutely none of it. So I was in a worse state after I asked the question than I was before the question. So all of these things were going through my head. And as a result of that, I thought, well, would it be wonderful if we could create an engaging way of giving information to people in a fun way that they can, be part of their everyday lives. And so as a result of that, I came up with the 1% Club. So the 1% Club is a deck of cards. And on each deck of cards, it's got a move well tip or a sleep well tip or a think well tip. And it's got a QR code. And on that QR code, you can find more evidence-based information so that if you want more information, you can do it. And so I decided to create these cards, and I've been showing people about all these cards. I have quite a lot of interest in here. And as a result of this, I'll be developing more types of cards like this. I do a lot of research on football, so I'll be developing the 1% Football Club, tips to help you with your football performance. The 1% Cycling Club to help you with nutrition and sleep and thinking and moving well during cycling. I have talked to people about menopause. So I'm currently developing the 1% Menopause Club. I've also developed the 1% Kids Club as well for advice for children on how to eat well, move well, sleep well, think well, with tips for teachers and tips for parents to help them with their engagement. So that's my passion, I guess. My passion is to help promote wellness, to prevent illness, to maintain performance, to democratize science so that it's easily available for people. And no pun intended, it's easily digestible, and it's bite-size and snack-size information that they can do every day to sustain their well-being, to help with their longevity, to help with understanding what protein requirements are, what supplements to use or not to use, and how we can, live better without even having to have this overwhelming bit of science coming in. So that's my passion. How can we help people really understand that it's relatively easy to take control of your superpowers? And your superpowers, if you're eating well, if you're sleeping well, if you're thinking well, and if you're moving well, you can do anything in life. But it needs a bit of hard work for yourself, and you need to embed good practices so it becomes fun, it becomes engaging, it becomes sustainable. So that's my mission.
Wow, that for sure. That is amazing. I mean, I always find that, if somebody gives me a big thing to read, or I imagine, as you were saying with your colleague, was it, who was heavily pregnant? I can imagine there being just so much information that you have to read and take in when you're pregnant, and it must be so overwhelming. And probably all you want to do is think about, the excitement and, just getting through the pregnancy that can be really difficult. And I've always found that I take in information a lot better if it's bite-sized, or if it's spoken to me, and I get to hear it rather than read it. So I think that what you're doing is just amazing. That's a fantastic way to get people to be more engaged, for sure.
So these cards are, it's wonderful to hear some of the stories of how people use them. Some colleagues, they'll play a game of cards on a Friday, and they'll pick a card and they say, we're all going to try this week, see how you go. So it's that peer support there. I've given it to someone else, and they said, my kids are going to love this. And they were talking around there, around the dinner table, and they picked out, try a new meal this week. And that was the tip. You think, well, there's not much to it. So now they decide, they're talking amongst themselves, who's going to buy it? Where's it from? What's the carbon credits the food has? What nutrients does it have? What's the portion sizes? Does it have all the colors of the rainbow, etc.? So we've just enhanced the nutrition literacy around that family constellation, just from a simple tip. And the whole point there is that if you can build that engagement with people and they feel ownership, then they're more likely to carry on those good health promoting behaviors. So then, in terms of longevity in life, you're living a better life because you have your superpowers. You're looking after yourself. You can do these other things, and you're reducing the risk of illness as you go over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Aj, you have shared so much educational content with us today, and people might like to find out a bit more about what you've shared and what you do. So obviously you've shared about Imago, but where can people go if they want to find out more about you and what you do?
Well, they can check out my website. It's www.ajmolali.com. That gives me all the details about myself. Please do reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always looking for new people to engage with and interact with and find new ways of collaborating. You can check me out on Instagram and Facebook and so on. And also our website, imagowellness.co.nz. I'd love to hear from people.
Excellent. Well, I will put all of those links in our show notes so that people can find them easily. But for now, I am going to have to conclude for today. So thank you so much for joining us. I've certainly learned a lot, and I hope that our audience has as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
And to our audience, thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
You have been listening to Aging Less, the Longevity Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website at longevity.lifemanagementsciencelabs.com, where you can join our movement. I'm Marie Stella. Thanks for tuning in.